Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to be in Melbourne, and I guess that's where I am. I've been all over your country, zigzagging from Sydney to Canberra to Brisbane and then down to here, so it's nice to settle for a bit. I'm going to be around Melbourne for about a week, and really looking forward to just being here. 35 years, huh? That's just another way of saying I'm an old fart, and it's just the way it is. I'm better than the alternative, I guess. And this is a conference about belonging and about inclusion and about relationships and all the good things that all of us want in life. And it reminds me of a quote I heard, and I guess it's true. I don't know. An infamous, maybe famous American bank robber named Willie Sutton was asked, "Why do you rob banks?" And he said, "Well, that's where the money is." Little glib, right? Well, why would you go to work? Well, that's where the people are, And if we're about inclusion, if we're about really making sure that we're facilitating lives for people that have similarity with all others in our society, it's pretty hard to really have an inclusive life if you're not where the people are. And so many of the people of the age of the folks that either you are, if you happen to experience disability, or the people that you care about and serve they're at work during the day. I mean, at most, not all. I realize that in your country and mine, there are people that manage lives without work. I'm kind of aspiring to that right now, but at my age, it's called retirement. I don't know if that was I guess theoretically, I had the idea that it'd be nice to lay on a beach in Australia, day after day, week after week, month after month. I don't know who was ever going to pay for that, but again, employment is one of those great routines of life that I think we all ought to be aspiring to in a much clearer way. But along the way, disability has gotten in the way. That employment's one of those very tricky relationships, and along with that word, the emotional relationship is right up there with employment. I think some would say infinitely trickier, and this is not a presentation about that. I don't think I'll live long enough to figure that one out. But as far as employment, really is a unique relationship, and as people with disabilities have sought to become members of the workforce and have their own jobs, I think they're far less interested in being a member of the workforce than they are just, I'd like a job. I'd like something to do that is rewarding to me, that returns to me the resources necessary to do some of the other things I would like to do, and to be with the people that are my age or that are even of diverse ages that always have an answer to the question, well, what do you do? And employment is, and how we answer that question is very, very important. So let's look at the way that most of us got jobs. And if in this audience you're working, you probably applied for your job, you competed for your job, and theoretically, I think whether you're from Australia or from the States, you were the best person at the time for the job. You had the skills, you had the credentials, you had the experience, and there were other people that wanted the job that you have, and for whatever reason, and I'm sure it's good reasons, and congratulations to all of you who successfully competed for your jobs. They may not have thought about it that way, and I guess there are times and situations in both of our societies where it's like all you have to do is live and breathe. Come on in, we need warm bodies to do work. But that's not so often, and it's not the jobs that I think people really aspire to. And if you happen to have disability and you happen to have a lot of it, the likelihood of being able to successfully compete the way we have is significantly impacted. And the fact that so relatively, I mean, I've only been here a week, but everybody rushes to tell me, Mike, you have no idea. In fact, you guys just said it, what a relatively low labor force participation people with disabilities have. How few people in their plans actually have employment in the plans for the funding that's available in your country and in mine. And I'm not here to compare. We've both got a long, long way to go. And I think we've been waiting for an innovation at times. You know, what we've done in the past is we've tried to prepare people. We've helped them with their interviewing and try to get their resumes up as well as can be, maybe some employment experiences, maybe an internship. But at the end of the day, if your disability affects your lives significantly, still when you're being compared to others, even employers that have taken on an enlightened perspective will often say, well, you know, I'm sorry, and good that you're making the effort, but I'm sorry we didn't choose you under a competitive strategy. And it's a reality that while it's not definitional of all people with disabilities, there's certainly many, many people who experience disability in their lives who have the full ability to compete if they're given the opportunities of a level playing field, reasonable accommodation, and you know, laying aside some of the presumptions and maybe even prejudices that have been part of the issue of disability and employment. A lot of folks can work, but it's going to leave a whole lot of other folks that even with all of that taken care of, it's going to be a lot tougher. And in my life, I'll take you through some of the experiences that I have had to kind of get me to a place that I'd like to interact with employers in a different way. There's absolutely nothing wrong with open employment with the typical way that employers hire, but it's not resulting in large numbers of people with very significant impact of disability being employed. In my introduction, we started back a number of years ago an organization called Employment for All, and we meant it. We meant it. I mean, I'm not naive enough to think that all of a sudden, or even within my lifetime, that we're going to see the same rate of participation in employment by people with disabilities as we see by folks who do not currently experience disability. But I think we need to aspire to that. I think and we need strategies that make it possible. And right now, even with some of our best traditional strategies, hasn't proven to be enough. And one of the things that at the end of the day, and I know it happens here because I've spoken directly to individuals who have told me about this, and I believe that they're doing it, certainly in the States, that the threshold is a competitive threshold. You know, you don't get to show up at an employer and say, you know, I'm here for my job now. And I've looked at your company, and you're really a nice company, so, and I'd really like to work in your finance department. And I'd like primarily afternoon work. And I really don't want to work with Microsoft Excel because I hate it. So I'd really like to work in a certain way that, you know, really fits my needs. And obviously I'm being facetious, but we know it. I mean, it doesn't work that way. You know, we have to. If we really, really want a job to fit who we are, too often we have to really compete. We have to almost do a lifetime of work. And then we kind of get into that situation where we might be able to pick and choose. And I like for that to be sooner than later. And so one of the things that we began to think about was, could there be a different construct all the way around? Instead of this competitive standard that focuses so much on productivity. Think about, I mean, there's some people in this room who experience cerebral palsy and other physical disabilities. If your net value is only how fast your hands work, you're screwed. I mean, your body's just not your friend as far as being able to do a productivity. My fat little fingers can move faster than yours, and that's competition, you know? And it's, I mean, it's a tough thing. And you Aussies are competitive folk. I mean, I don't have to wait long to look at your newspapers and anything. I mean, you put sports right on the front page of newspapers, and, you know, I get it. And so are we. Americans are the same way. We're both competitive people. We relish that. But what if competition isn't what you've got to offer? And then what if the system that provides employment is designed on a competitive perspective? That's not in your favor. And I'm not espousing some change of political, social contract here. I mean, that would be, it wouldn't be well received, and it would be totally naive. But I think it is possible to approach employers in a way where the focus is more on contribution than on competition, and let employers voluntarily decide to take that route. And what we're finding over the last nearly 30 years in the States is that employers will do that. They'll do it one at a time, because what I'm going to tell you, at least employers tell us, makes sense. And so again, when the impact of disability increases to the point that competition is not likely to be your best thing that you have to offer, that significant disability can actually create an absolute barrier to employment if competition is the threshold measure. But if we can switch that to contribution, every person can work. And that's a unique situation. So I'm gonna tell a number of stories, and I want to start with Kim's story, because what I'm telling you, at least from my perspective, and I'm not trying to tell you I invented this stuff. This was kind of one of these journeys that I and many other people, I'm sure here in Australia also, have had, but it's the story I have to tell you. And so in introducing Kim, she's a young woman from the southern U.S. city of Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham is the way they pronounce it in Alabama, not Birmingham the way our British cousins would pronounce it, or maybe you guys would here. But it's the largest city. It's not the capital city in Alabama. And Kim was a young woman who knew right from the beginning she had a lot of disability. She had cerebral palsy that affected her ambulation, her communication, her manipulation. And on top of that, she had intellectual disability, at least at some mild level of impact. And as she went through school, that put her in a special school and did not give her access to all the academic outcomes that so many other students were having. And when she was done, she was tested pretty severely. And when I say that, we have tended to know people with disability, again, by the comparison to norms and standards that we say, this represents what we expect for a typical person in our society. And so we need to make sure we compare her against those so we will know if she has whatever it is we think she has. Now, I mean, I'm sure if we'd ever ask her, she'd say, wait a minute, don't waste your money. I got it, get over it, find something that I can contribute. Don't spend any more time, but our systems, and I think I'm afraid yours also, spend a lot of time doing that. And so we reestablish right at the point of the threshold of adulthood. Oops, wait, this is gonna be really hard. You may need a whole lot more preparation for work, or you might need a separate life that supposedly is equal, but we all know that is not equal. So anyway, Kim finds her way to an employment project that is trying to look past that. And so instead of testing, even though she had been tested, we said, okay, we won't test you. We'll take a look at who you are. We call that process discovery. And we found a lot of very interesting information. We found a different Kim within the disability commodity Kim. I mean, she's a young woman that can keep a lot of us employed, frankly. She can keep special ed teachers, rehab counselors, personal assistants, bus drivers that drive accessible vans, and just imagine, go on and on, all the people. If you just see her through, and wait, we're talking physiotherapist and occupational therapist and speech therapist, and you keep going, But on the other hand, somewhere in there is a young woman who is trying to see life the same way that all of us are. And it seems a waste of just so much, just to say, well, I'm sorry, you have a lot of disability and the competitive standard isn't working for you. So we tried to look past that, and we got to two things that Kim really tried to tell us. And one was she had an intense interest in fashion. I'm taking an awful lot and distilling it to a very little. I mean, discovery is a process that takes hours and hours over weeks and weeks, and I'm distilling it to a very, very fine point here. Fashion. She likes fashion. And she felt like she could make a contribution through using a computer. So there's a whole community of employers around Birmingham, Alabama. It's probably got 750,000 people in the city itself, and then another that many again, so maybe 1.5 million in the greater metropolitan areas. I mean, it's nowhere like Melbourne or the big cities here, but it's a fair-sized city with lots and lots of workplaces. And if we just started with the labor force, the market, and said, well, what's hot in Birmingham? You wouldn't be led to fashion. Birmingham, unfortunately, is not the fashion capital of anywhere. So if you just went a labor market approach purely, then Kim's going to find out, well, we got this job, and there are some toilets that need to be cleaned, or there's some tables that need to be bussed, or there's some this or that need to be folded. And she probably would have done it because she really would like to work. It's like, at least you're thinking I can work. But I think the contract here is not that we just find a job, but that we actually see the labor market through her lens, and that's a different thing. So we tried to do that, and in doing that, among a number of other places, we found a place called Parisians Women's Wear, somewhat optimistically calling itself. It's a better women's clothing store in the deep south of the United States. And a job developer, so-called person, made a pitch, because if Kim goes in and puts her application in the pile of applications that an employer would typically receive, hers would go in the pile of don't think so, okay? And you wouldn't have even seen her yet, but her background, she doesn't have a high school diploma of the sort that other job seekers would have, has no employment experience, and she might try to couch the fact that her language is difficult to understand, but still, it probably would not have been seen. But she had a good representative. And on her behalf, the job developer made a pitch for Kim working in this company. And as the folks in the previous presentation established, employers are surprisingly accepting when they hear something different that makes sense. But what they were hearing here was what in the States we call competitive supported employment. So the employer heard, we've got a young woman that would actually like to work in your business. That's good news. Not just, you don't even have to be hiring, but she would like to work here. And not only that, she's going to get support that can support you and your employee to better assure that the job will get done. And we understand that you have your expectations, Mr. or Madam Employer. So the employer said yes. And that's not at all unusual. I mean, if we can kind of break out of our own uncertainty and go out and approach employers, they're surprisingly accepting of possibility. They're not these, folks that are just like standing guard at the door to the workplace, by and large. And so, in doing that, Kim finds herself on a job. This is a first day picture. It was kind of a bare place, but she was hired as what's called a pricing specialist. Clothing comes in from all over the world into this distribution center for Parisians women's wear. It's going to go out as prepared for each workplace, and this clothing needs to be sorted by size, et cetera, by style, and it needs to be priced. And so on that easel sitting on Kim's desk is going to be shipping manifest with codes on it. She types into a database and punches a button, and the specialty printer in her area prints out spools of price tags that someone else will put into something called a pricing gun. Looks just like a handheld pistol, and you shoot those nylon tags with the cardboard prices. You've seen them, I've seen them. That's her job. It's got to be done. Distribution center. It's a good job. It's an open job. She works with people who talk fashion all day. She gets a 35% discount at the local Parisian store. She floats to work every day. Life is good. Except that by the end of probation, she has to be at productivity. Now, the employer laid it aside. The employer said, I'm assuming that she will do it. And even in spite of course, we didn't tout the evaluations that showed she would not likely be productive at the rate that they wanted. She worked her heart out for 6 months. The highest productivity she ever got was 43%. Average was about 36%. Kim has the use of one hand. Did I say that? That one hand has spasticity due to cerebral palsy. So imagine trying to enter data with one hand affected by spasticity and try to reach a level of productivity expected by an employer. And as time went by, it became evident that the company had procedures that they applied to all people. They didn't even require 100% productivity. They only required 70. So if you produce between 70 and 100, you're in clear air, no comment. I mean, you're not given a gold star for being a wonderful employee, but you're still working there. If you get over 100%, you can start thinking about your gold star. If you drop under it, however, drop under 70, then first you can expect a verbal reprimand. This is within a pay period. A verbal warning, and then a written warning, and using a time-honored American sports metaphor, 3 strikes, you're out. Third time, you're fired. So it wouldn't take, if she's going to pass over from probationary status to employment status, she's going to lose her job within 2 weeks. That was the pay period. And it's an interesting question. What did we expect of the employer? And for the life of me, I don't know the answer to that. This is not the employer's fault here. It's no problem here. This is like we wanted something miraculous to happen. She goes to Parisian, she has this physical awakening, and she meets productivity. Or what, you know? So we went out and found her another job, and it was quite patronizing to do that. We didn't even tell her we did because we wanted a safety net. We knew it was coming. Well, it did. Right at the last day of probation, the lawyer shows up. We know him. He's the guy in the 3-piece suit. And the job coach is there. The Kim supervisor's there, the woman in the blue suit there. And they all go down toward the human resource department, and they're going to have a chat. And what the chat was going to be, we were sure she's going to lose her job. So they picked up the personnel manager along the way so they'd be sure and have all the backup they needed. And they went in. And in that meeting, one of the things that happened at the door of the office was the lawyer stood in the door and told the job coach, Ms. Carson, we won't need you. Thank you. In fact, we've got a chair for you right outside the door. But no, I'm sorry. And it's a bitter lesson that we really don't have much clout in somebody else's business. We may be there to support, but we don't have any authority by any means. And it was made clear to Brenda, the job coach, that we didn't. And Brenda's thinking, let's just get this over quickly. This is we've got the job by. Oh, it was a changing room attendant at a department store in town. Kind of an interesting cut-on fashion, no computer stuff in it, and the meeting kind of went on and on. 10 minutes to 20, 20 minutes to 30. And Brenda tells a story, the job coach, about wanting to find out what in the world could be taking so long. Just tell her she can't work here, and we'll get on with it. And Brenda is a woman who is very transparent. Tells on herself, in other words, and she said, Mike, you won't believe what I did. She was telling me the story. She said, I wanted to hear what was going on, but they wouldn't let me in. So I got up from my chair where they made me sit, and I put my ear to the door. And I pushed it real hard trying to hear, but the door was thick, and I couldn't hear what was going on. And then she said, I panicked. She said, I channeled Lucille Ball in I Love Lucy. And she knew if this was Lucy, that door was going to open and she was going to fall into the room in total embarrassment. And so she hurried back to her chair, but in the process, tripped over her own feet and fell in a pile right in front of the door. And then she was really panicked. And this isn't going very well for Kim. And so she just got seated and was hyperventilating and oh my gosh, and the door opened. Finally, 35 minutes later, out comes Kim. She's smiling. And so Brenda's thinking, okay, let's cauterize the wound here as quickly as we can because this is tough. Nobody wants to be sacked. And so they moved over to the side of the hall, and Brenda says, Kim, I'm very sorry about your job. And Kim says, yes, I am too. I'm going to miss these people down in computer pricing. And Brenda had her mouth open to say, but I've got you another job. And Kim says, but I've got another job. And Brenda goes, well, wait, that's my line. What's this other job you had? And here's where things change, okay? Because what we found out afterwards was what took so long was the story that Kim's supervisor had to tell about what the deal was. And it took about 5 minutes for them to say, Kim, here's your productivity, or here's what's expected at 70%. They even had a chart. And here's 100%. And here you are down here day to day. Do you understand that your productivity is not at this line? She said, yes. I think she knew it all along. They said, well, so you can't work in computer pricing, but let's turn it over to your supervisor. And the supervisor said, well, Kim, we really learned to appreciate what you do for us here and who you are. You're the kind of employee we really need. So Kim's supervisor went to other supervisors within this sprawling distribution center. And she started talking to him. She said, I got a woman in computer pricing. She's not going to make productivity, not anywhere near. But her quality is outstanding. Her attitude is great. She is a first-rate employee and a first-rate woman. Do you have anything that needs to be done that is not getting done in your area? And I know when I heard that the first time, it was something that said to me, this is not how I've thought about approaching employers. And she went around, she didn't go to janitorial services. She didn't go to the food service or maintenance. She went to the buyers that Kim would have loved to have been one of, and said, do you have tasks that need to be done? The people that go to Milan and Paris and New York City. And then she went to finance and asked finance the same. And then she went to reception and asked reception the same. And what Kim found out was she was offered a set of tasks that were derived not from an open job, nobody had ever done it, but from tasks that needed to be done that weren't getting done. And when I heard it, I knew this is different. This opens possibilities, because for a person that was about to lose a job, she had a 15-year career. She would still be there if the company had not been bought up by a ravenous other company. That's the real world. Businesses get bought up by other businesses, And so an Atlanta-based business buys up a Birmingham, Alabama-based business. Now you may think, well, why didn't they offer her a job? They did. They did. I said, you're welcome to go to Atlanta. But a strange quirk of fate had happened when Kim started her job. Her mother was her primary support. When Kim left her job 15 years later, Kim was her mother's primary support. How many people with disabilities get to make that shift? I have, many of you have. And Kim was glad to do it. She wasn't going to leave her mom. And so she had to say, I'm sorry. She took a buyout. And she's working today in a different customized job. So what does all this mean? First, is it legal? That's one of the first things we checked in our country. Unless you have a bargaining agreement that stipulates a contract of defining a job, it's totally legal. Second, do we have to wait on somebody like Kim's supervisor to do this? Not advisable. In all my career, this is my single experience. So we better be able to be a proxy for that supervisor to help an employer look at their operations and see areas of benefit. And if we do, we've done something, the term job carving has come up today. And typically speaking, job carving is a term of art used to remove tasks from existing job descriptions so that what is left is available to the job seeker, the employee to do. And we needed job carving to get here. But I think with job carving, even though employers have been willing to do it, there's a sense of loss. If I go in and see a job description and say, if we can take that away and that away and that away and what's left, the person can do it, the employer's either going to want to reduce the pay, or even if they say yes, there's going to be a sense of loss. Now wait, why don't I just hire somebody that can do all of those tasks rather than removing those? This customized employment is formative. You put things together based on benefit to the employer, but also fitting the needs of the job seeker. And here we go. There we go. And it took a long time. The story I just told you is 1988. It took until 2014 in the States for us to turn that into law. This is like that singer-songwriter out on the road in every little podunk town in Australia, and all of a sudden they break through, and it's like, oh man, that person just burst on the scene. No, they didn't. They were out there for years and years, and just finally somebody started listening. Well, that's kind of what's happened in the States. We now have, this is federal, about the only thing that President Obama was able to get passed in a bipartisan way was our Federal Rehabilitation Act, that both sides of our very rancorous political aisle came together and approved a concept, and within it has a definition for customized employment. Now, I won't read you this bureaucratic language, but it basically says that customized employment first is based on a determination of the job seeker's strengths, needs, and interests. We're not talking about an evaluation. We're talking about a determination, and read discovery here. Discovery is qualitative way of understanding who people are. But at the same time, it's designed to meet specific needs and benefits to the employer. And it's a voluntary relationship. In the States, we have all kinds of civil rights laws. I mean, we've done that for years and years. You probably have those here in Australia. But whether you do or not, I would say to you, I would hope that customized employment does not become a civil right. It actually is more powerful when two parties come together and agree to do something. And we have plenty of evidence that employers are not the problem here. And in fact, I go around the States telling people just like you, you're not from the States, I understand that, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Employers are not the problem. When you offer an employer something that makes sense to improve their operation, they'll listen. We're the problem. We have to get our heads around it. We have to start thinking that employment is possible and engage with them. Do I mean every employer will say yes? Well, of course not. Of course. They're absolute reasonable reasons for an employer to say, no, thank you, but I'll pass. So there's a lot of legalese here. I won't get into it. But it is about unbundling and flexibility at the end of the day, but it's not just about asking employers to be flexible. It's asking employers to consider benefit. And as we do that, let's take a look. We start with discovery. We avoid job titles. I never will go in for an open job. If you do that, you're competitive again. The job seeker, not the labor market, drives what people get. I don't care if somebody has just built something out here in this side of Melbourne and man, there's going to be 10,000 people working there. Only if the person wants to work there does that matter. See, I mean, that's a great business, a workforce development opportunity. I don't know what that is. I'm pointing as if there's somebody building something over there. But the point is, it wouldn't matter. What matters is the person. So this is driven by the person. And then, and that is appealing to employers. All job descriptions are negotiated, not pre-existing. They occur in the community in regular businesses or in self-owned, not cell phone business, self-owned businesses, okay? It's individualized, one person at a time, no groups. I've just said the voluntary nature of this. I think it's the strength. I've had employers change their body position when they hear they don't have to do this. And I'll say it. There's no law in our country to say that you have to do this. But if you find it of benefit, you might want to think about it. Now it's like, now we're talking, now we're negotiating. We have to have a plan that drives this, and it's got to be an employment plan. It's got to be a person-centered employment plan. And I know person-centered planning is very, very strong. I love person-centered planning, but I've hardly ever seen one dedicated to employment enough to actually make it happen. If you want employment to work, you've got to dedicate a person-centered plan to employment. I'm sorry, you'll just be too tired after all the other good stuff you're doing in the person-centered plans you do to add employment. It's almost always at the end. So just dedicate a plan. Do two. It's not that hard. And we're based on tasks. Pay at least the minimum wage. Now, I want to get to that. I know your minimum wage is very high, way higher than ours, and I still think it'll work here. It's a universal design strategy. All of us, all of you. I've had a customized job since 1987 when I didn't want to go to work in a certain place, and we started talking, and we ended up customizing so I could do entrepreneurial stuff and a wage job. For 13 years, it was the very best wage employment I ever had because I was able to have the job fit me and the employer voluntarily customized. But when you do this, somebody's got to give up stuff. Compromise has got to happen on both sides. Your politics are like ours. Compromise is a dirty word. I think compromise is one of the best words in the English language. It gets us to a point where both parties achieve something. Instead of winning, it's about finding an opportunity for both of us to come out. And we got to think a lot about what we let employers know about the issue of disability. Very, very important. A process is so necessary. Discovery starts it all. Positive paper, we call a profile, follows. Then a customized plan, we call it a customized plan for employment. This is a person-centered plan, but it's customized. Then we develop non-traditional, visual ways to show an employer. If you try to use a traditional resume for a person that's had no work experience, who has a ton of disability, who doesn't have any kind of academic credentials, they're going to get put in the reject pile at the personnel desk. And in fact, avoid the personnel function of a business. The personnel function of a business is to weed out people to get the best. We want to talk to those people in a business that experience the benefit of the contribution. That's hard. But employers will do that if we work hard to do it. And you're going to need job development representation and negotiation. Once a customized job has been agreed to, then you dovetail with supported employment. Supported employment still is necessary as ever. This doesn't negate that at all. Discovery sits at the base of this. Without discovery, it's virtually impossible to customize. And I'm going pretty quickly here because I'm really cognizant of the time we have. Discovery ends up basically distilled into three areas of focus. Conditions for success on the part of the job seeker. What needs to be in place for this job to be successful? What are the intrinsic interests of the job seeker? And what are their discrete potential contributions? Translated into employer language. So if an employer is looking at a list, they don't want to see nice person, lovely personality. They want to see data entry. They want to see the things that I'm making up tasks here. They want to see tasks that if they see the task, they recognize what the task is. And then on the employer side, beyond unmet needs, many employers assign tasks to highly paid people within a business that could easily be done by someone at an entry wage. That is a business deal. It's not handicapism. It's a business deal. Managers all the time do tasks that other people could be doing. If we approach, I mean, a lot of employers never think about this. They just do it. I mean, I've had a human resource manager. I bet she was paid way over six figures. She said, Mike, before you came today, I spent 30 minutes trying to figure out how to do a certified letter to a customer. She said, you probably have somebody who could do a certified letter from me a lot cheaper. I said, that's what we mean by that. So, again, if an employer figures that out, you got a business deal. And it's one of the most interesting things to talk to people in businesses, especially, I love to talk to people in offices. Say, think about your job. Can you think of certain tasks that would make your job better? I'm not interested in people giving us all the garbage tasks that they don't want to do. At times, that can be a place to start, but I'm really interested in making somebody's job better. So this becomes basically an algebraic equation. It becomes something that you basically say, if we start and solve for the job seeker on the left-hand side, and then our job development is to solve for which employer is going to gain the benefits that then match the person. So both sides come out. The algebraic equation is wonderful because you've got balance on both sides. They equal. But we've not thought about it that way. Now I'm going to go ahead with some, there's more that I have to say, but I'm going to go ahead with some examples. So I'm going to go here and just give you a potpourri of examples. Here's a young man who left 4 jobs because he didn't like any of them. But with his autism, he couldn't say, let me enumerate the reasons that I don't like this. He just left. His parents were confused. And one of the reasons was nobody really knew who he was. We just found him jobs because he could do the jobs. When we learned about him in discovery, we found he had an intense interest in police work. Now, he's not going to be a police officer. That would be, if he applies for that, he's not even going to get considered. But I can tell you he's had a 20-plus year career working for a local sheriff's office, and what you see him organizing on that table are misdemeanor arrest reports and traffic citations that were sitting in boxes that I'm sure were keeping the sheriff up at night, realizing these things are not being filed because all of my clerical staff have been moved out for the renovation that's now taken 2 years, only supposed to take 18 months. Employers have needs, and James has been meeting those needs for years. Here's 2 brothers with very quirky conditions for success. One brother wanted to be home by 1 p.m. He wanted to watch soap operas on television. The other brother said, I'm worthless before about 11. And they wanted to work together. I mean, not at the same time, but they wanted kind of a tag team job where one brother would start. So we did that. And so what was the employer need? Folks, there's crazy stuff out there. I'm sorry. The employer that's the job coach or job developer, but the employer that hired these people wanted customer information digitized. That seems fine because his receptionist office manager wouldn't do it. She wouldn't do it. And Doug tried to say, why don't you fire her? And he goes, shh, because she's got all the relationships. I mean, it's not like business is always this fine oil machine. These brothers come in and do something that the employer could have just said, do it to the manager, but he didn't. I mean, it's all kind of stuff. Trang wanted to work in a radio station. She has a long-term goal of being a disc jockey, but she's so far for that. I don't even think you apply for the job of a disc jockey in a radio station. So in a customized way, she does tasks for reception, for the disc jockeys themselves. She does tasks she saved the advertising manager's job. They had a great advertising manager selling ads for a small market radio station. She had one problem. She never turned her paperwork in. So her invoices for her pay backed up for weeks, even months. Well, it drove the employer crazy, the station manager. It's like, you got to get your money in. But she wouldn't do it. So instead of firing her, Trang does the paperwork, and both come out. I mean, there's all kinds of jobs, even the station manager. Tony does all this. I mean, he treats musical instruments like they're items on the altar at church. And this was an owner of this company that got mad at people who were just abusing all their scratching their instruments and not really paying attention because they were contract people. Tony comes in, and it's like, oh my gosh, these instruments are almost sacred objects. And music was the thing for Tony. He has Williams syndrome. Some of you may be aware that Williams syndrome has kind of a natural connection to musical ability often. And we really have to watch avoiding the this is not a pun, the crap jobs that society has. So if you were to think about what's the dirtiest job at the child care center, you don't have to think too far to know that changing nappies would be the deal. And yeah, they would be glad to offer Carolyn the job of changing diapers all day. But trust me, your fervor for child care is going to fade quickly if you're looking at the wrong end of a 2-year-old all day long. And a good negotiation helped the employer understand that, she'll change diapers okay, but couldn't she help with truly an unmet need? And one of their unmet needs is that little tyke in the green shirt. He's a biter. He's a biter. So in the afternoon when he gets cranky, the lovely little toddler, your 2-year-old next to him, gets a chunk taken out of her arm because he's cranky. So, interesting story. Could Caroline begin to see the escalating behaviors, sound familiar, folks? The escalating behaviors associated with that little guy and others of his ilk, and intervene with activity before he bites? So imagine if she's successful. 2 months after she started this child care center, the number of biting incidents were at 0. Think of the value of that contribution. I have no idea how fast she works. She works fast enough to see an escalating behavior and intervene with an activity. That's value. And if you start believing that, you can let employers understand that they can set the price. Sal, his mother told a story during discovery about Sal using his wheelchair as a platform to take groceries through gang territory in the South Central neighborhood of L.A. South Central's been on television. It is one tough place. And the folks in Discovery translated, if you can deliver groceries through gang territory, you ought to be able to help in the genteel office space of Transamerica Corporation in downtown L.A. to deliver necessary items within an office because it was an unmet need. Okay? Kurt saves a company's insurance payments around slip and falls. Production workers refused to sweep up the laminate chips that built up on this milling process in a factory in New Jersey. And what would happen is that as the laminate chips fell on the floor, it was like little pieces of ice. And then you lose your concentration, and all of a sudden, you've cracked your elbow, your tailbone, you've sprained your wrist. Their workman's compensation insurance was out the roof. So what does Kurt do? He's a guy who refused to leave the sheltered workshop. His mother said, "You want to put my son in front of a computer? He doesn't want that. He loves to sweep. And by the way, not dirt, he loves to sweep sawdust." Man, chill a bit. If we can get your son a job sweeping sawdust in a place where he gets real pay for the work he's doing, would you do that? And it's like, oh, never thought of that, Well, Kurt's one of the owner's favorite people because workman's comp premiums plummeted after Kurt starts taking care of the workers who won't take care of themselves. Ethan plasters his bedroom with sports posters so much there's not a square inch, millimeter, centimeter, whatever it is. There's nothing. There's no wall space. So he's a guy that loves sports. And yet he's exactly the kind of guy that ends up bussing tables or folding stuff, you know. So he works in a University of Utah where he helps sports teams, 13 sports teams, who are about to do what's called away trips. And if it's home, he's not needed. But on their away trips, every athlete has their duffel, and that duffel is full of items that are needed by the athletes. And so Ethan makes sure that every single one of them is ready. And by the way, he gets field privileges and court privileges. His dad sits up in the nosebleed section wishing he was down on the field with his son. Customized employment will definitely work for you. Thank you very much, folks.